Three separate texts record Jesus and his disciples reclining at a table, naming the food, naming the wine, naming the day, and calling it, without qualification, the Passover. A fourth text records the same night, the same room, the same men, and places the crucifixion itself at the exact hour the lambs were being slaughtered in the temple courts. Both cannot be the plain chronology. Both are stated as if they are. The surface record offers no seam, no footnote, no acknowledgement that another version exists. Only when the four accounts are set beside each other does the fracture appear, not in what either text hides, but in what each states outright. What follows is the record as it stands, tested against itself. Matthew places the disciples asking Jesus where to prepare the Passover. Jesus sends them into the city with instructions for a man who will show them a large upper room, furnished and ready. Mark records the same exchange, the same instructions, the same room. Luke records Jesus sending Peter and John ahead, explicitly stating, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." All three name the meal itself, before it happens, as the Passover meal. That evening, Jesus reclines at the table with the 12. He speaks of one who will betray him. He takes bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and says, "This is my body." He takes the cup, gives thanks, and says, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." After singing a hymn, they go out to the Mount of Olives. John's account of the same evening opens differently. "It was just before the Passover Feast," the text states, "and Jesus, knowing his hour had come, washes the disciples' feet." The meal proceeds. Foot washing, the announcement of betrayal, Judas departing into the night. Later, after Jesus' arrest, the guards lead him to the palace of the high priest and then to Pilate. The text notes, "By now it was early morning, and the Jewish leaders did not enter the palace because they wanted to avoid ceremonial uncleanness and be able to eat the Passover." The trial before Pilate proceeds through the morning. John records the hour. "It was the day of preparation of the Passover, and it was about noon. Jesus is crucified." As evening approaches, because it is the day of preparation, and because the next day was a special Sabbath, the bodies are ordered removed before nightfall. One detail sits inside that same meal. Jesus tells Judas to do what he is about to do quickly. The text records that no one at the table understood the instruction. Instead, the disciples assumed he was being sent to buy what was needed for the festival, or to give something to the poor. The assumption is recorded without correction. It is a note that festival provisions were still outstanding, that the festival was still ahead of the table, not already upon it or behind it. No one at the table heard the instruction as a departure from a completed Passover. Laid end to end, the surface record holds together as a single sequence: a meal, a betrayal, an arrest, a trial, a death, a burial before sundown. Pull the layers back and the sequence splits along a line each gospel draws for itself. The technique is parallel divergence, not a scribal variant, not a translation dispute, but four independent narrators, each stating a calendrical fact the others do not repeat and do not contradict directly, because they never address each other at all. Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not merely imply the meal is Passover. Each states it as a direct fact, in the disciples' own recorded words or the narrator's own voice. "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." No hedge accompanies the phrase in any of the three. No later verse in any synoptic account revises or qualifies it. Mark and Luke sharpen the claim further, and neither leaves it as a passing label. Mark records the disciples' question falling on the day when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb. Luke records the same day as the one on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Neither text treats this as background detail. Both attach it directly to the meal preparation instruction, dating the meal to the same day the lambs were slaughtered, not naming the meal Passover after the fact, but anchoring the preparation itself to the sacrificial calendar in the same breath that sends the disciples into the city. John does not state that the meal is not Passover. What John states is different: a time marker before the meal, just before the Passover feast. A legal detail during the trial: entering Pilate's palace before Passover would defile the accusers, and a repeated designation at the crucifixion itself: the day of preparation of the Passover, and, at 1931, a special Sabbath, requiring the bodies removed by evening. That special Sabbath note is invoked on both sides of the question. A Sabbath tied to the Passover calendar could fall on a day other than the customary weekly Sabbath, and the text itself does not specify which is meant. So the detail cuts no clearer path through the divergence than the markers around it. Each of John's markers is a plain factual claim, recorded without commentary, sitting inside a timeline where the lambs are slaughtered on the afternoon Jesus dies. The bifurcation is exact. If the synoptic naming is the recorded chronology, the meal is Passover, and John's markers describe a Passover with different internal detail. If John's markers are the recorded chronology, the meal takes place the evening before Passover, and the synoptic naming describes an anticipatory or proleptic meal, using Passover language ahead of the actual date. Neither text steps outside itself to resolve which. 3 witnesses name the day one way. 1 witness marks the hour another way. Both claims are made in full sentences, not implications drawn from silence. Outcome A rests entirely inside John. The text states twice, at the trial and again at the crucifixion, that Passover had not yet occurred when Jesus died. The defilement note at 1828 is not incidental. It is a legal detail that only makes sense if Passover was still ahead of the accusers on that morning. The noon hour, recorded at 1914, the day of preparation of the Passover, places the sentencing at the same window the lambs were being prepared for that evening's meal. The Sabbath note at 1931 reinforces the same calendar. Bodies removed before a special Sabbath, language distinct from an ordinary week. The framing is not introduced only at the trial. John's opening note at 13:1 places the same marker at the very start of the evening. It was just before the Passover Feast, the text states, and Jesus knew that the hour had come. The pre-Passover framing is set before a single detail of the meal itself is narrated, and it does not shift across the 3 later markers that follow it. The defilement clause and the crucifixion hour designation both use the identical before the Passover orientation already established at the opening. Under this reading, the Last Supper is a final meal shared before Passover arrives, and Jesus' death aligns with the moment of the lamb's slaughter, rather than following the meal that commemorated it. Every marker John records points the same direction, without one recorded phrase in his own text pointing the other way. Outcome B rests entirely inside the Synoptics. 3 separate texts, not one repeating another's wording, each place the identical explicit claim in the mouths of the disciples or the narrator. This meal is the Passover. Matthew's disciples ask where to prepare it. Mark's disciples ask the same. Luke has Jesus himself issue the instruction: eat the Passover. No qualifying clause follows any of the 3 statements. The dating is not asserted once and left standing alone. Mark records the disciples' question, falling on the very day when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, and Luke records the same day as the one on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Both statements tie the meal's preparation, not merely its later naming, to the sacrificial calendar itself. The same event John locates at the crucifixion, the Synoptics locate a day earlier, at the meal's preparation. The claim is made twice, by 2 separate narrators, in the same breath as the instruction to prepare the room. The meal proceeds with elements consistent with a Passover setting: reclining at the table, bread, wine, and a hymn sung together before they depart for the Mount of Olives. Matching the shape of the meal each account has already named. Under this reading, the meal is not anticipatory language. It is a direct, 4-fold claim. 3 narrations naming the meal itself, 2 of them dating its preparation to the day of sacrifice. And any calendar detail in John describes the same Passover week without overturning what the synoptic texts state outright. No verse in Matthew, Mark, or Luke acknowledges John's placement. No verse in John acknowledges the synoptic naming. The four accounts run side by side, never crossing to correct or confirm each other. Three texts state the meal was the Passover, two of them dating its preparation to the day the lambs were sacrificed. One text states, twice, that Passover had not yet come when the meal's aftermath reached its end. Both claims are recorded as fact, not inference. The bifurcation is not a gap the text leaves open by omission. It is two closed statements, standing in the same case file, neither one deferring to the other.